Welcome to B2B Revenue Leaders. As always, B2B Revenue Leaders is brought to you by Testimonial Hero. Testimonial Hero helps you get more out of your best customer stories by creating customer video content for your entire buyer's journey. On this episode, I'm joined by Andrew Bolis, who is a Fractional CMO and growth advisor focused on helping B2B SaaS companies grow. And on this episode, we are chatting about ways companies can generate demand with a small budget. Hey, Andrew, welcome to the show.
Hey, Dustin. Thanks for having me.
So today we're going to be talking about demand gen in general, but specifically, how to use it at smaller budgets, be a little bit scrappier, and, focus on efficiency. Before we do that, though, demand gen has kind of become buzzwordy. Like everyone is throwing it around in a variety of ways. So in your words, how would you describe what demand gen really is?
I think that's a great question. I think initially demand gen started as helping the sales team generate revenue. I think now there's a few different concepts around it. I think it depends on where your company's at. So I think, for example, it's very hard to do demand gen if you don't have a good brand story, if you don't have great messaging and very clear differentiation. So like if you don't have something like that, I would invest some time into doing that first before investing a lot in demand gen. But assuming you have that, then I would say it's like engaging, nurturing, and retaining, customers at that point. Engaging is in prospects, nurturing is in, again, prospects, and trying to, expand those accounts, and then obviously trying to retain them.
Cool. So yeah, I want to dive into the story side as well first, actually, since you mentioned that, because, demand gen and be it LinkedIn ads that are more content focused or, I'm getting a bit tactical here, but organic posts, all that sort of stuff, it's getting more crowded, right? Like more people are focusing on that because a lot of companies have seen success. So for companies who maybe their story is generic, they haven't invested in what is my point of view, all of that, where do you suggest they start to really figure that and figure out what their unique point of view is?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think at early stage startups, that's the biggest problem I usually see. There's two places. If they have existing customers, they should talk with them and ask them what they love about the product, especially like their happy customers and why they pick their product over alternatives or what the customer was using before. If they do not have customers because they're very early on, they should just have conversations with like people in that industry. And the conversations could be kind of coffee chats or whatever, and almost approach it as like a brand new founder who's even thinking about a concept or a product to launch. And they're just doing interviews, getting feedback from people in that industry to see if it's even sort of a fit or would add any value for those people, and kind of make it clear that, hey, this is just more, I want your feedback. I'm not actually going to try to sell you anything. But assuming this is like a CEO, a head of marketing or a head of sales, they can easily do that, through LinkedIn and just kind of set up a few coffee chats. And I think if you've been in that industry for long and this is a new technology, it's actually very exciting for you to like give your feedback and kind of share some of your expertise or your thoughts around it.
For sure. Yeah. The thing I found with that too is customers will just find a way to say things in a simpler way than you would. Like if you try to do it in a vacuum and you get a bunch of execs in a room and the founder and, the engineer, if it's a product, it's so easy to go into the weeds and talk about stuff that your customers don't actually care about and isn't that interesting. But then that becomes your brand story. So maybe that is part of the issue at the early stage where they skip the customer side. It's their baby. It's their product. And they end up with kind of this bland, maybe technical, not super interesting story. In which case, you're right. Demand gen won't work. Like who is going to listen to that content up front without being invested in the product?
Yeah. And even if demand gen works where it like brings traffic or leads, it's either going to be like that traffic to be the wrong type of traffic altogether. Cause when whatever you're saying is likely not going to even attract the right people. Or even if it is the right people, then when, those leads engage or let's say request a demo, when they're talking to the salesperson, they're going to hear something different than what they were expecting in the first place. So it's almost like you're just going to be wasting budget. And especially now with the kind of economic slowdown, that's why you really kind of have to get the messaging and differentiation right first.
For sure. Yeah. And it's interesting too, this necessary shift towards not just messaging as well, but creative. and actually having quality creative, whether it's organic or doesn't really matter. But it seemed for years at least, all you ever heard about was targeting. Here's this hack, like really tactical, not marketing things. Like it was more
Yeah.
marketing ops, probably driven by the companies wanting to promote it a little bit, honestly. But you're seeing the shift back where you have to be creative. You have to have something that stands out in the feed or where email or wherever you post it, which is
Yeah.
kind of fun. Like that's the fun side of marketing. So I'm glad it's going back in that direction.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think also like one of the best ways to kind of tie all three of those together, like messaging, differentiation, and to do it in a creative way, is to also incorporate some kind of storytelling.
Mhm.
And sometimes you don't have like kind of a great story, but sometimes it could be as simple as, hey, the founder used to work in this industry themselves. They were doing, let's say, consulting. They couldn't find the solution they were looking for. They Other solutions they tried, they didn't work for them because of X, Y, and Z. So that's why they actually even created the company
Mhm.
in the first place, to solve that, that problem that they were specifically having, because they figured other people would want that solution as well. So even things as simple as that, and then you make it part of a story, and then you have that founder talk about that story in interviews or even like just video recordings, and you share that. It's just a much more exciting way of introducing like a new product, versus just talking about like, features, or this is why we're better than X, Y, Z, and things like that.
Totally. Yeah. And I'm sure if, that founder had that problem, he wasn't the first one at that, right? So if he's
Yeah.
solving that need, like a bit of a tangent here maybe, but I joined this company I'm at currently, Testimonial Hero, because I tried to record my own testimonial videos and do it in house,
Yeah.
and it sucked, and it was a bad experience. So I joined because they solved that problem, right? And that was how it was pitched to me to join the company. So imagine how, like, and I'm our target audience. We sell to marketers, right? So even just putting that story out there, it's just more relatable than, we're built on this platform and it's super fast and we're the only ones who do it. Not quite the same. So I do want to dive in a bit to, you mentioned efficiency, you mentioned the economy, and who knows what 2023 is going to bring. I think it's up in the air for most of us after a strange 2022. So demand gen can be expensive depending on how you do it. And I think a lot of people will throw a whole whack of money at top of funnel ads. I hate using the word top of funnel, but LinkedIn ads, display ads, etc. What's some advice you have for people who maybe a little earlier stage don't have the budget or need to show results before they can get the budget? How should they start their demand gen journey?
Sure. That's a great question. I'm going to talk basically about two different strategies. The first one is sort of capitalizing on the fact that you have like a certain number of employees. So even if you're early stage, if you think of like the C-suite, or the leadership team, plus just everybody else at the company, you're talking at least anywhere from, 20, 50, or 100 people. From there, there's a lot of things you can do on LinkedIn just using that group, and it's all kind of organic and free. So it's almost like, it's a little bit like social selling, but you're not actually having even to sell anything. It's more like building kind of brand awareness and interest. And then from, kind of, I feel like after you get that right, then there's, I'll talk more about demand gen strategy afterwards. But I do think in my experience, most founders and most, you know, early stage companies are just not using LinkedIn correctly, and they're not even capitalizing on it. Even from an organic sense, like forget ads, they're not even using, doing LinkedIn organically well.
For sure. And I think that can be a good test ground as well. Like you're going to get some posts that flop. No one responds, no one comments.
Yeah.
Maybe the algorithm just screwed you over in that one, or maybe the message doesn't resonate. But it can be a good test ground where if something hits, then maybe it's time to run an ad. Like you prove that this thing resonates, people engage with it. Whether you clip it and run that post as an ad, which some people have had success with, or whether you replicate it in a more creative way.
Yeah.
Yeah, we found it's a good test ground to see what people actually care about and respond to.
Yeah. And I think, and again, I think even when you bring up LinkedIn, I think people always go to posting, right? And posting helps. But if you back up one step too, like, and this is like the best sort of influencers right now on LinkedIn. I mean, some of them, have courses around this stuff. They think of LinkedIn itself as an entire funnel, right? So one, they'll even tell you before you invest a lot in posting, optimize the profile. So that in the case of a company, that would be the company page, but also like if you're going to, which I recommend, utilize the C-suite leadership and sales and customer success and marketing, to get them to post, all of their profiles should be optimized as well. Because the idea is going to be, hey, if someone engages with your post, they're going to click through your profile or company page. And from there should be like a link, whether it's, to book a meeting, do next steps. And very few companies even sort of ever optimize the profiles. So I would start there. Like I would start with, let's optimize our profiles, have very clear messaging about what we do and who we help, and get that right. And then then focus on the content.
For sure. Yeah, I think what opened my eyes to that was someone referred to the profile as basically your landing page or the equivalent. And we spend times changing button colors and doing random stuff and doing so much for these landing pages. And then maybe you don't touch a profile for a year aside from updating the jobs that you're a part of, right? So I think that's good advice for people. One thing you mentioned is getting, especially early stage, getting employees to post. I've struggled with that personally, getting people to do that. I know there's tips and tricks to do that, whether you ghostwrite or, come up with a power hour and sit down and do it. But any advice you'd have there on motivating people and getting them comfortable to do that once they have their profiles optimized?
Yeah. And I think there's two parts to that. One is like, how do you even sort of roll something like that out altogether? And then two, where does the content come from? For rolling it out, the best way to do it is to actually get buy-in from the leadership team and ensure too that the leadership team is committed to doing it themselves. So that's again, ideally you have the CEO on board, head of sales, head of marketing, and head of customer success at minimum. So when they're on board and I would even say like have them go first, like have them optimize their LinkedIn profiles, create some content for them to post and things like that. Cause otherwise, if you try to go to employees and the leadership team is not doing it, like it seems very hypocritical.
Yeah.
And it's just much harder to get buy-in. So I'd have the leadership team go first. And after the leadership team is maybe even doing it for a week or two, then start bringing in employees and really support the employees by making it very easy for them. By, at least creating like some content, like templates that they can personalize and edit a little bit before they publish them.
Yeah. And I think that ties back to the story as well, and having a coherent story and point of view that people can not parrot, but be aligned with at least in their own voice. Because I think that's where people freeze up as well. Let's say they work for a company that provides contact information, like Zoom info type company. If they don't know the story and the point and the differentiators, how are they going to post anything relevant or related or interesting, right? So I think having that is super important. So just to dive back in, you mentioned getting the profiles optimized, getting a regular cadence on the organic side. Let's say you've got that, you've started to see some traction, you want to expand the program, build it out a bit. What would be some of the next steps you'd consider there?
So another thing that makes it easy to generate content, also builds a lot of kind of authority, is just having some kind of like, even if it's a monthly video podcast or kind of interview show that company does. And even just starting out by interviewing some people on their customers is good. And then just by reaching out to kind of other thought leaders in that space, whether it's organic or a lot of thought leaders too will speak on your podcast if you pay them, like if they're pretty sort of large in that space. It doesn't matter. I think just having kind of like an interview show, you end up with, let's say like 30 minutes that you can turn into clips. And again, that's another easy way to create content. And then I think that the biggest thing too is to also like make it so that employees don't feel like they must post anything, or use the templates. Cause there are employees who are very creative, and they'll want to, they understand the theme and they want to kind of riff on it on their own. So give them that freedom. And let them kind of experiment and kind of add their own voice to it. Cause then that creates kind of a bunch of different angles and generates new ideas as well.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point because some companies I've seen get hung up on that a little bit. Like they don't necessarily, well, some of them are kind of crazy and do want to vet every post, I think, which is going to defeat the purpose. But even if they're not doing that, I think some people are a little bit afraid to maybe show personality since they're tied to the company and, they don't want to rub the company the wrong way. So I do think that's a good point of letting people know, be yourself, you're a person, be creative. Obviously don't ruin the company image, but you have leeway and you have freedom to do this. Because otherwise it's just going to be a bunch of, parroted, reposted, shared posts, which the algorithm hates. And then people actually viewing it don't care for anyways, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's why too, you need the leadership team to go first.
Yeah.
And then if it's coming from like the leadership team, like the head of marketing, so on the marketing team, hey, like, what we're creating for you, or what we're creating for you and I guess other teams, is templates, but they're more thematic. So if you want to riff on that theme on your own, you're familiar with our messaging, how we're talking about our product, basically take some creative freedom there. And again, I think companies cannot kind of freak out. Like if there is a post that goes up where it's not good,
Yeah.
worst case scenario, just ask that employee, like, explain the problem to them and just ask them to take it down at some point, or just keep that in mind.
Yeah.
But that's the problem. I think a lot of these companies get hung up too much on that when like they're small and they need all the attention they can get. So they're getting hung up on these details instead of just like, what they really should be doing is almost like being like very like risk averse and just trying to get as much attention as possible quickly, versus trying to kind of like, limit the creative freedom of their employees, or control the process too much.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, eyeballs are eyeballs. You don't want them to be completely negative, but having something a little bit different out there is generally a positive. I'm going to go somewhere I think this podcast and most go a lot, because it's a confusing topic, and it's attribution and how we tie it to this. I have a love-hate relationship with attribution. I started on the far end and loved it. Now I'm drifting maybe towards the other end, somewhere in the middle. But I know people are wondering that, right? Like, I'm launching this small program. We're being scrappy. I need to prove results so I can actually free budget to pour some gas on this. So how would you handle, consider, or, even frame attribution in this case?
Sure. So I think on a high level, I think focusing too much on attribution actually like destroys great marketing. And it doesn't mean that you shouldn't do any kind of attribution. You should, but at the same time too, like if you're always trying to prove out results, it's just going to lead to like pretty bad marketing, and it's ultimately going to negatively impact that company, where the company might not even be around that much anymore,
Mhm.
because you end up just doing all kinds of sales tactics, which if you can get away with just doing sales, you wouldn't even hire marketing teams.
Yeah.
So that's, again, I just wanted to kind of get that out of the way. Now, within attribution, I think, you can use things like self-reported attribution on like a demo request form, where it's like, how did you hear about us? And you give them like free form text field to fill out however they want, and kind of analyze that a little bit. But again, I think you shouldn't be getting hung up on attribution too much. The other thing too is, I find asking the sales team, or having like BDRs or SDRs or the sales team, like just check in with people when they, are doing a demo, or just even a discovery call. Hey, how did you hear about us? Where have you been reading our content? That gets pretty good feedback. And the sales team themselves will usually hear, because the people will bring it up in calls with the sales team. Hey, I enjoy your LinkedIn posts, or I like this post. And also like LinkedIn, you get engagement, you get likes, comments. So this, even just checking in with the sales team, you'll get a lot of feedback, but it's not going to be perfect. And if anything, it's always going to be partial, because you can't track everything.
Mhm.
Um, I think where attribution goes wrong is when you have like a marketing leader who's kind of all of their performance is evaluated based on like marketing sourced stuff. And you have a sales leader who's responsible for overall pipeline and revenue. That's when the company will typically miss their goals altogether as far as revenue growth. So I think, and I wrote about this recently, I think the best system to have is to have both the head of marketing and sales responsible for the total pipeline goal and the total revenue goal equally.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, we were talking before this, actually. I'm in a unique situation where, like, I run both sales and marketing here, and it's really nice. But when I didn't have that situation, I always set marketing's goal as what we called an SQL, but really it was a qualified meeting that resulted in opportunity, which is essentially pipeline, right? Because I can manipulate. I wouldn't do it. Well, depending on the motivation. But you can manipulate an MQL number, right? Depending on the requirements, you can drive a bunch of really shitty leads if you want. And it's just that misalignment and incentives that wrecks companies, right? And we've seen it with SDR side as well, where they get comped on meetings, don't care how good the meeting is. They don't get bonus on revenue or quality. So you're driving all these bad inputs in the top, and then you're surprised when you miss the goal, right? So yeah, it's interesting. And I think companies are starting to cut all the stuff that is doing that and kind of trimming the fat and being more efficient. So it'd be interesting to see how that continues in 2023.
Yeah, I think definitely with the focus on sustainable growth, um, a lot of things that are just not effective are going to go away. And I think right now there's a lot of pressure on marketing where a lot of marketing budgets and teams are being cut, but
Yeah.
also, and I hate to say this, what's going to happen too is then when salespeople are not going to be meeting their quotas this year, because some of them are going to be unrealistic, there's also going to be cuts on the sales side as well.
Mhm.
Or what I'm seeing too is a lot of, if you do deep marketing cuts where now the sales team is not getting the support, they're not getting the
Yeah.
content, not getting like the awareness, not getting like events, maybe not even getting enablement. So now, now you're expecting that salesperson to still meet the targets with very little to no support. And when they don't, a lot of these companies will let those people go when they haven't like done anything wrong.
For sure. I think we've seen a lot of that. And I mean, it's so cyclical. It's kind of scary, right? Like we've seen this happen before, and then it goes back to normal and kind of hits this flat line where people are being efficient, focusing on companies. Then you hit that crazy growth stage where money almost seems unlimited in the market. And that's kind of what drives a lot of this, right? So it'll be interesting how it shakes out and the changes people make here. What we're like, we really shifted everything over to efficiency. Anything that wasn't driving ROI in a tangible way, whether through attribution or even anecdotally through feedback, qualitative, we've decided to trim back and, really focus on profitability and efficiency. And it's kind of fun, honestly. Like it's a little bit more interesting than just here's a bunch of money, you can go blow it on events or do whatever you want. Like you have to be creative and really focus and try new things to make it work.
Yeah. And I think, the reason too that so like even basically in my last role, me and the head of sales were both responsible for like the total
Mhm.
pipeline generated and the revenue growth. And just that switch, what it does then is it also from a marketing perspective, allows you to focus on more impactful marketing
Yeah.
and things that build a bit more like brand affinity, where just, people just feel like they're getting so much value from, let's say, your content, events, whatever it is you're doing, that even if they're not going to buy right away, it's almost like they like you and you're top of mind when they're ready to buy or have the budget or sort of have the conditions to kind of move forward with a purchase.
100%. I mean, it's almost like an invisible pipeline, right? There's companies where they put out good content. I don't have a need right now. I've never talked to them, never contacted them, had a demo, but they put out enough stuff and I know their product and like it enough that when I'm ready to buy, I'll just go to them. So,
Yeah.
if they knew that, I'd be in their pipeline, but they don't. So I think that's kind of the power of demand gen as well, right? Like you're building that up. So when those people who don't have a need hit it, they come to you rather than, going to Google and clicking on 10 ads and 12 organic searches and doing 20 demos and then going feature to feature with these companies.
Yeah, exactly. And I think like one company that, does this well is Lavender, where they have
Yeah.
their Lavender Joe.
Yeah.
And they, have the videos and stuff. And now I know from like some hiring they've done recently, they're even going to invest a lot more into that.
Yeah.
So Lavender is interesting because I think Lavender is almost as popular as like much larger companies in MarTech or sales tech. Yeah, they're much smaller, but because their kind of approach of like building a character and, creating these kind of small sketches around it's pretty effective where even if you don't use them, you know them and at least you know what they do.
Yeah. 100%. Like they're one of the ones that's like Lavender or Winter. There's a few that are on the smaller side or just are providing value and taking that approach. And those Lavender ads are one of the few in B2B that I actually laughed at, like legitimately chuckled at seeing the sales dude on the bench talking to random people. But that shows the creative side. A lot of companies would probably be too cautious to do that, right? And take that risk, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And again, I don't know if Lavender does this or not, but it also creates opportunities for a lot more interesting marketing because
Yeah.
Lavender Joe now could be like someone, they can use it other materials, other content, where now it's kind of a character. And now it's kind of like, it's almost like there's a lot more like storylines. Like it just opens up a lot more opportunities to be creative,
Yeah.
with ads, with content, with a lot of other things versus just doing kind of typical, you know, sort of B2B SaaS marketing where it's just about the product and here's why we're better kind of thing.
Yeah. The funny thing with this that just came to mind is, it's kind of like what Apple did with the Mac versus PC thing like 20 years ago. It's just now we're finally starting to do it, kind of drifted over to B2B with the character side. So yeah, kind of just an interesting parallel that played so well back in the day, and it still works. Like having an actual physical person that people can relate to and follow and refer to. It's just interesting how that never seems to go away.
Yeah, no, and I think Verizon did the same thing where they had a guy for a while,
Yeah.
and other companies. Yeah, so I mean, it's pretty effective because like it makes it so that now, like instead of just thinking about a company or a product, you're thinking of that person first, and I think that person is way more memorable. So it makes it easier to remember the product versus like when you have to think about a product name or a service name, it doesn't come up as easily in your head.
Yeah. No, 100%. Cool. So we touched all things demand gen there. I think we kind of jumped around a bunch of super tactical stuff, the attribution side. I know you post about this stuff and a bunch of other things a lot on LinkedIn as well. So if people do want to connect with you, learn more, where should they go to reach out?
Sure, they can just connect with me on LinkedIn, and my name is Andrew. Last name is Bolis, Bolis. I post on there frequently. And yeah, they can connect, reach out, send me messages. I'm happy to sort of help with anything.
Awesome. Cool. So I'll include that in the show notes for all our listeners. Andrew, thanks for joining me talking about demand gen. I got a few ideas of things now I'm going to go bug my marketing team with that maybe I want to try. So thanks for joining me today. Thank you for listening to this episode. My big takeaway for this one is really that risk aversion can be your enemy as a startup when you're looking to generate demand. A lot of times being too buttoned up, having too many rules, monitoring social media of your employees a little bit too much can really pull you back when what you're really looking for here is affordable, organic ways to get eyeballs and really generate demand. So that was another episode of B2B Revenue Leaders. If you enjoyed it, head over to where you listen to your podcast and click subscribe. And until next time.